Good evening and welcome to The Square. Tonight's conversation is going to focus on the Continental Free Trade Agreement and how it can potentially boost entrepreneurship amongst young people in Africa. This conversation is happening at the margins, at the end of the Youth Connect Africa Summit that happened and ended today. And this is a summit that brought over 2,500 delegates from 90 countries across the continent. And with us, we are joined by someone all the way from Mali, who's also here for the conference, and to talk about this discussion as well. Issam, thank you for joining us here on The Square.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Issam Chlo, I hope I pronounced it correctly, is the co-founder and managing director of Suguba Africa. My name is Dan Mpisi. I'm part of The Square, and as always, I'm joined by my lovely panelists. I'm joined here by Charles and Berna. Always a pleasure to have you on The Square.
Pleasure, Dan. How are you?
Good.
Yeah.
And Ephraim, great to have you on The Square.
Likewise. Thank you for having me.
Good. Like we always do on The Square, before we get into the conversation, we're going to have a couple of key highlights for this week. I'm going to start with you, Ephraim. I'm sure there's some things you want to share that happened this week.
Now, I think news of the week is really interesting because you have to pick from a bunch of things. But I think I'll pick on the fact that we had Youth Connect and we had 2,500 delegates from over 90 countries. I think the choice of topic of the conversation at this Youth Connect was different, because normally you'd think that Youth Connect will talk about mainly economic issues, or at least mainly, purely economic issues. But I know there was a plenary on teenage pregnancy, and I think it shows that there is a level of growth when it comes to how we understand our problems and what needs to be addressed, that you can't just solve the issue of poverty, but you also have to solve so many other aspects around it. For me, it was an interesting experience.
Did you attend all 3 days?
Why are you putting me on the spot? You want me to lie on national TV? But I attended 2 days.
Okay, that's good. Fair enough. Charles, any key highlights for this week?
Very interesting times, political times. Our Foreign Affairs Minister, Honorable Louise Mushikiwabo, is in the run for being the head of the Francophonie. I remember in 2010, I hosted then Governor General of Canada at a debate at the National University of Rwanda at the time, retired 2010, and at that time, Honorable Louise Mushikiwabo was our Minister of Information. And that time, for lack of a better way of putting it, the Rwandan media was not as mature as it is today. And I needless to mention that subsequently the authorities were not as tolerant as they were today. So we had a lot of reason to be in the international media, not for the very right reasons. So here I am moderating a show. At the time, my panel consisted of Arthur Asimwe. There's a lady who headed Radio Rwanda at the time, Faith Mbabazi, and the audience involved other people. But now, fast forward, to put it in context, the Governor General in her remarks came and said all these good things or bad things that the government of Rwanda shouldn't have been doing or should have been doing. Our Minister of Information at that time came and defended government's position. 8 years later, they are facing off against each other. Very interesting analogy. But this is the most interesting thing. In the next few days or weeks, and if all goes according to plan, we will have a new Minister of Foreign Affairs. I think I want to watch how that is going to work out.
Are you going to be the one?
No, I don't think I'm in line of contention for that one, but speculation is as rife as you'd want to imagine.
I think a lot of people are looking forward to that, because the current minister has been in that position for the last 10 years, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, thereabouts.
Verna?
It will be interesting to see if the next minister can survive 2 years. Because they're quite big shoes to fill. Again, for me, it's also a highlight. Tomorrow, I think we'll get the official results, which will confirm perhaps what most of us have been looking forward to. But when you look at the discussions around Rwanda taking over leadership, most of it is around the language, which I think is just a small bit of the bigger picture. Because if you look at the Francophone community, you can look at it in terms of the market opportunities. And today, with artificial intelligence, the issue of language is not really a problem, if you ask me. But it's about what you have to offer. Can you identify opportunities? How do you position yourself to take advantage of, the bigger market and opportunities that exist within the Francophone community? So I feel that the discussion has to go beyond the language, because with technology, language is not really a problem today. Absolutely. Yeah, so for me, that's the highlight of the week. I'm really looking forward to seeing who will take over. They are taking over at a very... the environment has quite changed. The global environment, the local, regional, everything has changed. So it will be interesting to see how this, the next foreign minister navigates the current environment, bearing in mind that we are now at a point where Rwanda is an independent voice. So how you're able to position yourself and carry on that, it will be interesting to see how it evolves.
I think for me, my take on this is to see how the Franco-Rwanda relations are going to change, politically speaking, what this means for Rwanda and France going forward. So anyway, we're here to discuss the CFTA and its impact on the potential to boost entrepreneurship amongst youth in this country. And this is why you're here, because I think you really fit the profile. You walk the talk, so to speak. And all the way from West Africa, I think you're also going to give us perspectives on intertrade and the challenges faced and so forth and so on. So my first question for you is basically, as the managing director of Suguba Africa, your work is to support African entrepreneurs and prepare them to raise financing for rapid growth and expansion with a focus in Francophone West Africa. You'll tell us more about what you do, but my question to you is, what are some of the challenges you face in this regard, specifically from a West African perspective, that you think the agreement, once signed, will solve?
Okay. Well, to begin with, I want to also share my views on the news of the week.
Oh, yes, please. I'm sorry, that was an oversight on my part.
No, so I just want to echo what you guys said. When I was watching TV when Minister Louise actually announced her desire to run for office for the Francophonie, and it was in Mauritania a couple of months ago at the AU summit. And when I saw that, I was very, very shocked, in a good way, and surprised, because for me, really, Rwanda represents, the resilience and how the Francophonie has also some link with, La France-Afrique, the France-Afrique, which is a terminology used to pretty much showcase how France is dealing with its former colony. So clearly Rwanda has been the exception from the group, and just seeing that news made me realize, how important of a move it was for both like Rwanda, France, but also us, former colony of France, but also what it would mean for Francophonie and France-Afrique, because I'm very skeptic, and I'm a big critic of the France-Afrique, so the way France is dealing with its former colony. So for me, this news really gave me a lot of hope, in a sense that we could reimagine and rethink and have a new beginning on how the relationship between France and us, former colony, would be. So as much as you were really cheering up, I know I'm not the only one, and we're looking forward to some good news this week.
Good.
So to come back to your question, do you mind repeating just?
Yeah. So basically, what are some of the issues that you think you face as someone who's involved in intertrade from a West African Francophonie point of view, that you face and you feel that this Continental Free Trade Agreement, once signed, will solve?
Will solve, okay.
Yes.
So when you talk about entrepreneurship and the youth, what we're addressing two types of entrepreneurs. One is the entrepreneur who is entering into entrepreneurship out of passion, and then you have another type of entrepreneurs who are entering entrepreneurship out of lack of jobs. So in this case, out of necessity. So both, when they come to you in the centers that we work on, that we have, you don't necessarily identify, they could, you can't differentiate. So for you need to give them a service and help them bring the company to the next level. The youth we work with varied in type, in age, in level of maturity, in funding they have or funding that they want to get. But at the moment, I would say some of the biggest issues that they face, or at least when investors are looking at their businesses before investing, one of them is, the key one is maybe it's a too small market. Like, for example, if you have an entrepreneur who's developing a mobile application to help people in Kigali get access to a bike, for example, a bicycle, it's a too small of a market. So generally, you see a lot of entrepreneurs in Africa, all across, creating businesses that even if they get to the point where they raise money, the business model is successful, the market is too small. And this is something that pushes away investors. Like when investors want to invest in a business, they want to see how the business could grow really big and they could make a lot of money. So from that perspective, the size of the market is critical. But the industries in which those entrepreneurs venture in doesn't match necessarily the reality. So I guess that's one of the points, and CFTA could address that, because those entrepreneurs who have, potentially a market of more than 54 or 5 countries to work with. But the issue here is, again, in the industry in which the entrepreneur ventures. So if we have CFTA open, all the countries sign, ratify, and get implemented, then the issue becomes, how are they going to tap into those industries? If from the beginning, the business model or the model of the organization make it in a way that the market is only 5,000 people in Kigali, there's no way they could reach continental. So one of the things that we're really pushing right now is to encourage young entrepreneurs to think about products or services that could pretty much, where they could tap the whole of Africa. And this would be in industries that are relevant, but also that makes sense for us. So that it would be, and that's why we're advocating for the theme Made in Africa, because at the end of the day, we have 400 billion in imports for consumer industries that we could take from the importers if our entrepreneurs can step up the game and develop businesses that will make sense for the consumer. I guess that's the main point, is around really understanding which business you venture in, get into a business that makes sense, where you could tap into CFTA to grow. You could, and industries within the Made in Africa vision could be fashion. We all wear products, could be agro-processing, beauty product, you name it. So yeah, this will be, I guess, the main issue, but other issues, of course, around financing. Access to financing is the biggest hurdle and issue entrepreneurs in Africa face. Other than that, there's access to capacity building and others. But finding the right business model, I think, is the number one. And then all the other one could be worked around. I think
I'd want to come in and kind of, there are many ways you could look at CFTA and the way it's going to help entrepreneurs. I've talked about this on the previous show we had about around this, actually.
Our first episode, actually.
It was episode number 1. Yeah. We talk of liberalization, right? And we talk of part of also pushing the Continental Free Trade Agreement has been around how do we liberate our economies to spur on trade amongst ourselves so that we're not as dependent on, again, global powers to take our sugar, to take our products, to take our clothes, or supply us with our second-hand clothes. Now, what ends up happening is that we know this. Immediately you open up the borders, you find that and this is what people keep trying to say, that it has to be inclusive, is that it then becomes extremely easy. Something that was easy, not extremely easy, but easy for a multinational becomes extremely easy for them. And something that was hard for a small entrepreneur or a young entrepreneur becomes now easy. Now the question then comes in is that how then do we create equity to ensure that the growth and the benefits are inclusive, that it's not just a few large companies that are benefiting from exporting products. Now that comes to my second point around who imports what and who exports what. Because we have not also sat down to ask ourselves, what are our core competencies? For example, what is Rwanda's core competence? What are we exporting that no one else within the CFTA can produce? that we become the source of that. Because what you see happening, at least what you see with regional blocks, is that everyone is producing coffee. And everyone is relying on coffee. So then to what extent do we then say, okay, you're going to focus on coffee, you're going to focus on tea, you're going to focus on minerals, you're going to focus on... And that is, I think for me, the issue I see with, at least the challenge I see with with the CFTA, is that until we understand, we focus on the specialization within our economies, we find that we are just going to, we may have the policies in play, but the people we need to do the trade are not necessarily going to want to trade with one another. Because Rwanda would have produced sugar, Zambia would have produced sugar, Mozambique would have produced sugar, but who would want to import and export? And we saw this happen recently in Uganda. We saw it happen recently in Tanzania. I'm saying this in relation to sugar because that's my industry. We saw it also happen in Kenya, where there were shortages in-house, but there was still pushback from imports from within the region.
What about international imports?
Now, weirdly enough, international imports, again, were...
From the case of sugar, specifically.
Yeah, so international imports were coming in, but there was pushback for regional.
See,
and again, if you're to look back, it comes down to because the competitors in these industries are the same people. These are the same British, American companies that own these entities. So you find that they're competing against each other. So they're using, again, I feel like AfCFTA could fall prey to such actors who will then try and manipulate it for their benefit without actually delivering the kind of benefit we desire to see from it.
Bernard, Charles, do you want to
just to echo what Ephraim is saying, if we go back to the basics, and before we can even discuss the CFTA, and look at how the regional economic communities currently are functioning, as much as I would love to be optimistic, if you look at the RECs and in their current state today, I think it's a bit far-fetched to think of a functional CFTA. I'll give you an example. Let's come back to the East African community. For a very long time, the East African community was looked at as a model for regional integration, because they had made so much progress. Made so much progress because there was a lot of political will to do things. You agree or on specific projects, you get them done. Now, over the last 3 years or so, we have seen these countries walking backwards on regional integration. You're seeing elements of protectionism. And this is not just goods, but services. A recent case is of a Kenyan lady who was trying to get a work permit in Tanzania. They made it impossible.
And it was, and don't forget, it's also, she was also, her case was public because she was a high-ranking official, executive. Yes, but other than that, I'm sure many people go through
it. There are many ordinary people. Yes, there are many ordinary people that are struggling with that. If you look at trade, the sugar that you talk about. So when we're having the discussion around the CFTA, you guys are on the ground. I don't know why you get the optimism. Because for me, from where I stand, honestly, as a journalist, there's a lot of concern because I don't know what we will need to sort of invigorate the community, the politicians, to realize that we cannot move forward until we agree that we all need regional integration to function and function efficiently. We have seen a trend over time of increasing non-tariff barriers. If people cannot move, how are they going to trade?
Exactly.
Basic movement.
Yeah.
So I don't know, you guys on the ground, how are you navigating this, and where do you get the optimism that, the CFTA will be functional?
I can tell you from me, and we talked about this earlier, the optimism, at least for me, is that if we aim for the moon, we might fall amongst the stars. And even just the bush, because I feel like moving from here to the bush is better than nothing. And I take this, you talked about the free movement of people. One of the things that the EAC REC delivered was the fact that we could travel across borders with our IDs. Now, we know the challenges we're facing with the East African community, especially around political will. But, and again, some of the bureaucracies that took time for us to implement some of these integration policies are the same ones that are going to help us, or at least protect the integration from guys who want to step back. And I say this because, again, how easy is it, you know, the issues that we have within the region and the lack of political will here and there. At least if you assess it, how easy do you think it's going to be for guys to come back and say, okay, now you can't use your visas to travel? Because so much infrastructure and investment has been made towards that. And I think my optimism comes from the fact that, okay, we may not get what we want with AFCFTA, or at least we cannot get the 100. But even if we got 20%, it's still better.
I would like to just ask you, Issam, you know, and absolutely, Brenna, this is actually, you know, part of this conversation. Have we bitten more than we can chew? When we talk about the Continental Free Trade Agreement, but you have issues within SADC, you have issues within COMESA, you have issues within ASC, you know, you have issues within ECOWAS, and so forth and so on. I want you to, what are your thoughts on this? And this is also tapping into what you said at the Youth Connect Forum, when you really thought, when you really emphasized mindset as a collective mindset, as a tool of really answering Brenna's question. You know?
I totally agree. Thank you. I totally agree with you that I'm very skeptical about the power of CFTA to make it, because, you know, you have the regional economic communities. In West Africa, we have the same issue. Like, even if you can move goods, like at the border, for example, between Togo and Ghana. Recently, I know someone who had trouble just bringing in goods, because I mean the text and the law say you can go as you want and it's free trade, but locally they don't allow the implementation of that. But to come back to, I mean, the rationale behind CFTA. The goal, I mean, I'm not sure 100% what was the key, I guess, rationale, but one of the things is to allow Africa to get developed, right? To trade with Africa, to allow us Africans to buy our own products or buy from one another, to make it easier for regional trade to happen, because at least, you know, maybe there's infrastructure issues that are still ongoing that I know, you know, the African Development Bank and others are solving, but at least to allow that free movement of goods. But like what I would like us to maybe to reflect on is, before moving toward like Rwanda selling goods to Uganda or Tanzania, why don't we think about how within Rwanda we should consume, like, you know, made in Rwanda products, for example? How can we help companies within Rwanda that are in industries where consumers consume? You know, all of us here are dressed. I'm not sure, like, where you bought your suit from. You know, I love Western brands, don't get me wrong.
Are you wearing Made in Africa?
I'm 100% today Made in Africa. Yeah, I'm 100%, particularly made in Nigeria. Okay. And I feel really proud because, you know, last year I had a similar discussion and I was wearing like non-African attire. I was like, you know, I'm preaching, but at the same time, like, I don't walk the walk. But I'm just saying that because I think it's a mindset issue, because the goods, I know the goods are here. In Rwanda, there's ways in which, and this is the same case in Mali. Like, I consume a lot. Most of the goods I consume are Westerns. So if, let's say, we go past the, you know, the mindset issue, if we consume Western good in our country instead of local goods, it's maybe because they're not well packaged. Maybe we think that they're not as, you know, good or healthy. But all of that is within our mind. You know, we're coming from people, we know our heritage, you know. So if someone gives us food or goods that are not as good as, you know, Western standard, we need to get past that and learn to accept that as, you know, coming from our own people and to consume that. Because, like, before looking into CFTA is like intra-regional, cross-country. There's a lot of dynamics that are coming into play. How can we push ourselves to consume local? If we can get to the point where we said, okay, you know, I'm from Mali, I'm going to make everything I can to consume Malian. Then tomorrow, if my brother is coming from Cote d'Ivoire or from Senegal, then for my mindset, I'm already in a position to consume something that's local or at least regional. So I think that's where we're going to face the biggest issue. And just to reflect on that, for example, in the ECOWAS region, you can travel with one passport. You don't need visa. So, and most of the people, for their holidays, they will go to France, they will go to the US, they will go to Turkey, they will go to Dubai now, China. But You don't see us choosing to go to our own countries for vacation. I think this is also something that we could do, learning about each other, knowing, who we are. And you would see that, we Africans know more about non-African countries and heritage than we do about ourselves. That's where the mindset issue is really, and that's where we need to advocate to do that. And I have like an idea on how to do that, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, mindset I think is one issue, but if you also look at the other element, the cost of production, you will find out that for most local entrepreneurs, actually the cost of production doesn't make them competitive. Oh. And I mean, it's good that you're wearing made in Africa, but there are some people who will argue that in terms of affordability, a good outfit like you're wearing may not be actually be affordable for many ordinary people. If you are generally in Africa, in most countries, you have lots of people living on less than $1 a year, if we use that benchmark. So I think already we are seeing countries doing more to support local industry. In Rwanda, we have the Made in Rwanda campaign. Yes. That is very deliberate in terms of boosting
Rwanda is doing a great job at that,
local capacity. Yeah. But of course, we are impatient. That's one, and yet some of these, there are no quick fixes. But how you make local production competitive to a level where whatever they produce, yes, even in terms of price, when someone goes to a supermarket, it's much easier, because today if you go to a supermarket, you may find that a product from China is actually much cheaper than something that is being locally produced. That's one. The other element is, for instance, if you speak to fashion designers, when they go out and they are, showcasing their work, someone will come out and say, I need an order of maybe 1,000 pieces. They will have difficulty, producing that. Sure. So how do you address, issues around production to make these things affordable and more competitive? I think that's a key issue.
Okay. I want to piggyback.
Go ahead. Two things. One is around, we may not have a lot of control around the political will. And because there are also other dynamics. The internal politics of that particular country might make the leaders of that country more interested in solving their internal issues ahead of going out of their country to trade with others, or to live in harmony with others, or to compromise what they want to do at home at the expense of making their neighbors or the whole continent happy. And for one reason or another, you will never have full control over political will. And leaders also have different strengths. So let's just accept that that's how it is. But I think Issam raises a very big point around challenging ourselves, in terms of what can we do to strengthen what we already have. The other day I was positively shocked when I walked into a shop at Kigali Heights, and they had very good Made in Rwanda fabric, men's clothes. I went into Chic last week. Chic is one of our commercial buildings in the CBD. And there was these very nice shoes, leather shoes, men's leather shoes. Now, Bana raises a very good point about price. I think, and price, I'll beg to differ with you, because it's purely a mindset thing. We would be more than happy, many of us, to spend 40,000 francs on a pair of shoes from Europe, but not spend 35,000 francs on a pair of shoes that's made in Rwanda. And yet, when you compare like for like, the quality is the same, if not ours, better and more durable. So we still have a lot of work. That's the point we're raising, and thank you for challenging us around how we dress here on the square. I would probably take it a notch higher and look at this piece of furniture that is here. Shouldn't it be made in Rwanda?
I think this is made in
Rwanda. But we can give quite a number of examples, until the cows come home. Shouldn't it be very deliberate that if Volkswagen is going to put a plant here in Rwanda, it is going to be cheaper than importing the same Volkswagen, or probably the issue around price. If we are very price sensitive, let there be incentives for us to be able to buy that locally made.
I just wanted to make one comment. One, in terms of political will, I think we have an opportunity as Africa. We have a very young population, which
the youngest in the world.
The youngest in the world, which is going to be the one running these countries. And if you ask me, at Connect, this Youth Connect, I think one of the key issues that had to be discussed is what is the role of the youth in politics? Because increasingly, we tend to think that for youth, I mean, that's none of our business. We just want jobs. But in terms of, you know, actively getting involved in lobbying policy that will enable us to achieve what we want, there's still a gap there. So how do you position young people to see themselves as the decision makers of tomorrow, and they have to start today? I think that discussion is still lacking. And in absence of that, we'll continue to meet and talk about these things Davos style and go away.
Actually, to emphasize what you're saying, these meetings happen in terms of youth asking to be part of the conversation, in terms of implementation and everything, but they keep on happening, no results. They keep on happening, no results. So it's a cycle. I think what we need to do is actually reach a point where we implement this sort of, because the outcomes of the Youth Connect Africa, I hope that next year when it happens, we will be addressing and talking about the same issues.
And if I could just suggest, for me, it would be more useful if we have a Youth Connect that has more boot camps than anything. You know, you have real people, entrepreneurs on the ground showing what they have done and how it can be done, than having a Davos style
There was a youth converse organized by the Shapers, and it was actually, they did that. They brought entrepreneurs to talk about the experience. Then UN Women, in partnership with a bunch of institutions, Girl Effect, Girl Hub, Aquila, they had what they call the speed networking. So 25, 30 industry leaders sat, and then there were 2 innovators. They would talk to them for about 8 minutes. Then after, they would shift. And they did that for an hour.
And I'm sure there's some tangible outcomes.
Yeah, but now I wanted to say something around price, and it's in line with everything that we've talked about, even around political will. You know, one thing that we really don't take into consideration, and we've talked about this, but I feel like we only talk about it when it comes to government. We talk about institutional coordination. An economy or a business cannot operate in a silo. You talked about raw materials, right? That's one. But then 2, you also have to understand one of the things that hinders Rwanda's industrialization, and that's what now we were talking about, made in Rwanda, and I'm sure this is across the continent when you talk about made in Africa. We do not have sources of capital that allow for industrialization. Our funding systems and funding structures are so myopic in terms of they are such short-term financial solutions, which work well because our economies have relied on that ability for us to get cash flow in the interim. But we haven't yet seen the maturity of senior debt and mature capital that can absorb our need for industrialization. And I say this because, and you guys know it, I'm a firm believer that RSSB could do more. Our pension fund, it could do more in our economy to spur on industrialization. But no one seems to have that conversation, because I cannot go to commercial banks and ask for a loan at 18% and expect to industrialize, to build an industry that can go on and create 1,000 jobs and can go on and produce scale so that the made in Rwanda products are affordable. It's the same thing with the Development Bank. The Development Bank tried. But again, I feel like the mandate got lost in between there, and we've seen the issues that have come up from it. But until we address the ecosystem, I'm talking about the banks as one example. But once we talk about the ecosystem in its entirety, we talk of lack of skilled labor. How do we address this? When you talk about some of the regulatory frameworks around these things, how do we then sit down and say, does the ecosystem allow for us to achieve some of these objectives that will make AFCFTA a success, especially for the young entrepreneur?
Okay, very interesting, especially in financing models. But we'll come back right after the break. Please stay tuned. We'll be back right after the break.
I want to touch on your point after around price.
Many people have been asking what we have been up to. Well, we have told the different stories from decision makers, but this time round it will be different. We will be getting head to head with various influencers and get to the heart of the matter. It is not an easy ride, but we'll endeavor to get you there. It will be insightful, informative, and at times we will agree to disagree, because we are the bridge to your leaders.
Thank you and for joining us after the break. We are here discussing youth entrepreneurship and the Continental Free Trade Agreement and the potential it has to boost growth in this particular sector across Africa. With us is Issam Shlo. Thank you for joining us all the way from Mali. And just before we went to the break, we were talking about financing, the financing model in terms of increasing scale of industry, not only in Rwanda but across Africa. Is there something you wanted to add to that?
I wanted to touch on your price, your point around price. You know, like in the United States, for example, up to today, the U.S. government is subsidizing its farmers. You know, it's like the biggest economy globally, but their prices aren't competitive enough to compete globally with the rest of the world. But here you have the #1 power on earth subsidizing its farmers. So then, you know, pricing is relative and cost of production is relative. And I also wanted to touch on your point, Ephraim, about, you know, competitiveness. You know, there's this economic theory that's talking about comparative advantage. So each country should specialize in industries where they have the most comparative advantage to succeed. Like if Rwanda, for example, is a big producer of coffee and tea just because of the weather and because the landscape, then Rwanda should be like among other the countries that will specialize in those industries, and then the rest of Africa will focus on other industry, and then we'll just make sure that we don't import our tea from China. Like tea is like being drunk, I mean, every day across West Africa, and guess what? 99% of it is coming from China or Asia. So how can we make sure that, you know, we get our tea from Rwanda, for example? This is one point around competitive advantage. When we get to the point where we've identified industries in which we have a competitive advantage, because Mali, for example, we are a producer of cotton. We're the #2 producer of cotton. Unfortunately, we export all of our raw materials outside of Africa, and then, you know, it gets sent back to us. So how can we develop industries around those specific sectors where our countries have a competitive advantage and a comparative advantage? And, you know, in those industries, have our governments make sure they subsidize our industries, because that's what's happening, you know, in other places. Emirates, which is a great airline, Emirates up to today, at least from my knowledge, they're being subsidized by the UAE government. But when everyone looks at Emirates, they look at Emirates as a private sector company who's making the best service out there. But no, they're making losses every year, and the government is subsidizing them. So how can we first push toward that? And another point that I wanted to mention around, you know, regional economic you know, communities or even Pan-African, those are infrastructure and institutions that are here. What we've learned over the past couple of years with companies like Airbnb or Uber is you don't necessarily need to have like an institution or an actual infrastructure for you to develop a business or to, you know, to impact billions of people around the world. And for the case of at least CFTA, or how we can push, you know, governments or push just the continent to the next level, if we take the decision at our level to say, okay, we're going to consume African. If all the youth, for example, and youth are an easy population to influence because of technology. So if we can influence ourselves and our people to say, okay, let's shift and consume African and see the impact it could have on, you know, import, or it could have on local production, this could have a huge impact. I mean, I've done research a couple of days as I was preparing for my panel yesterday on the topic. And activism is a key part of that, you know, creating movement, creating activism. If we can go toward that vision, this could help us achieve our objectives without necessarily have to go through what it is. Because the last point I want to make is Airbnb, which you're all familiar with, the valuation of Airbnb today is more than the valuation of Marriott, of Sheraton. If you look at the valuation,
probably all of them combined.
All of them, yeah. If you look at the valuation, Airbnb is above them, and Airbnb doesn't own any hotel. They probably have a couple of employees in Silicon Valley. That's it. So how can we go past the need for us to, have those infrastructure or institution, but like just leapfrog them and see ways in which, using technology we could achieve, our objective.
Brenda, before we go for a Twitter break.
Yes, just to touch on a couple of issues that you raised. First of all, the role of research. You mentioned that you're doing research. If you look at the continent, I wonder, based on the work that you do, would you agree that we're not doing enough in terms of investment in science and research that would inform the kind of investments that we need to move and revolutionize our economies?
100%.
That's one. And two, when you talk about the youth, quite often, like if you look at Youth Connect, most of the youth that were inside Kigali Heights, Kigali Convention Center, are educated. We have the majority of youth out of formal education. How do you provide for that?
For that. Let's worry about the youth that are educated for now.
No, because,
reality check.
How do you account for that? Your company, do you have a strategy for these young people that are out of the formal economy?
Yes.
And the reason I ask that is because so far research has shown that that is where the problem is, in terms of political instability, social cohesion, that is where the risk is. So if you look at the current interventions, they are just mainly focusing on the formal sector.
Sure.
But to add, just before you answer, because we need to go to a social media feed, but also the next tweet more or less offers a sort of concept on how to better improve the issue of youth employment with regards to today's topic. So our first tweet here is from Ashili Karuretwa, and Ashili says that, great topic tonight. Our comparative advantage is less among neighboring countries, hence the competitive conflicts. Africa should invest in major projects like a single airline, energy companies, mining projects, etc., to allow for a win-win in Africa to boost youth employment. What's your take on this? Ephraim, I see you.
That's we talk about. I say this because it comes back to the same thing I was saying about what ends up becoming an elitist, exclusive club of single airlines. Question, who are the shareholders of the airlines? Who are the shareholders of these mining companies, these singular entities? At the end of the day, I'll come back to the sector that I know, sugar. Okay. You'll find a factory in Malawi, a factory in Zambia, a factory in Tanzania, a factory in South Africa, a packaging plant in Zimbabwe, another one in Namibia, one in Botswana. All one shareholder, and that shareholder is based in is a British company.
So you think, based on that tweet, this is just that sort of idea would be fattening the elites?
It would be fat. It would be fat. Yes, further. It would not address the issue it would not address the issues we're trying to address by setting up CFTA. It creates these, like I said, exclusive clubs. Unless the governments are setting up, they go into loss-making industries or loss-making businesses. So, for example, we have a development bank. We already have that. In Rwanda, we subsidize our airline. I know the same thing with the Ethiopian government. So the question then comes in: at what point, which sectors do we choose? Is it infrastructure investments? Is it, and then we can apply that method. But if we truly want to achieve what we want to achieve with AfCFTA, we need to.
And there's also a tweet here from Jackson, and Jackson says to us, again on the topic, I think CFTA mechanisms should go hand in hand with collective strategies for African nations to fight corruption. Again, going back to this, the tweet before on elitism.
He raises a very important issue, the issue of corruption, because you find that for most young people, it's very difficult to break through, because in most countries you have to bribe your way through all these partnerships. So I don't know how that will be tackled at continental level to facilitate the implementation of the CFTA. But corruption is a big issue in Africa.
Absolutely.
Well, not just in Africa. Not just in Africa.
Across the
It's a global problem.
Yeah,
I'd just like us to
absolutely.
go to one of the last tweets before we get to close. And this is a tweet that is from Richard, and he says, well, he's quite pessimistic. How will CFTA function effectively if all African countries are calling for their local producers and manufacturers to be supported? Calls to support local industries within each African country by their governments make me wonder how this will work. Which is true.
Yeah, it's true. That's what we're saying. Countries need to focus on industries where they have the biggest comparative advantage. And then everyone should agree that, okay, this is Rwanda's industry, and then this is Mali's industry. And then we focus on growing those industries. But I want to touch on your point. Like, I was in Nigeria 2 weeks ago, and so I was working with entrepreneurs, and those are the best entrepreneurs I've worked with in Africa so far. So those are entrepreneurs in the tech sector who raise up to $10, $15 million already within the 20s or 30s to grow their business. One of them, their name is Flutterwave. And Flutterwave raised $10 million because what they are doing is, you know, when you want to pay with your card, Visa or MasterCard generally ask you to have a card. But then all the informal traders that you're talking about don't have Visa or MasterCard. So how, as an informal trader, you can buy something in Tanzania knowing that you don't have a bank account, you don't have anything. So the Flutterwave is coming up with a solution at the moment in Nigeria, and they are expanding, where as an informal trader, you just get a card or number that you'll give to your buyer, and then that buyer can go pretty much anywhere to collect the cash.
Wow.
We talked with them extensively, and when I'm talking to Flutterwave and their team, what they're telling me is they don't look at formal versus informal. That for them, this is something that is coming from maybe the West, or this was ideology. You know, they're trying to help Africans that have issues getting services to the next level. So when we talk about formal and informal, or banked and banked, we need to look past that schism and say, okay, there are people like us. What are the issues? They're probably making more money than some of us. They are also in industries doing the same things that we're doing. How can we look at them as people and say, what challenges are you, and create solutions for them without necessarily looking at that, formal versus informal. And this was very inspiring because I really had the same understanding of you about the two, but then they just made me realize that, there's actually no difference. We just need to give the right service to the people that they want, because the reason why a lot of people are informal, maybe not in Rwanda, but because of corruption. Because if you open your company, if you registered it legally, you're going to have the taxes authority coming. You're going to have 1, 2, 3 coming to just take money out of you that will not go to the state, that will not go for public infrastructure, that will go into corruption. So Rwanda may be an exception, but when you look at a lot of the countries, the reason why people want to stay informal is just to avoid this corruption system. And sometimes we totally understand them. But the thing is, when they are informal and they don't have legal registration, they still pay tax. So,
If I may ask, this is just something that came to my mind. Where does your money come from? Who is your main?
Okay.
Is it in Africa or outside Africa? Just a blanket.
Does that change anything?
No.
I think there's a follow-up.
It's a very straightforward question. Is it
There's
in
a follow-up
Africa
to
or
that,
outside
actually.
Africa?
Okay. So
Mainly. Yes.
So over 95% of our funding comes from outside of Africa.
Exactly.
Or from non-African donors.
Thank you. And the reason I ask that is because until we take ownership of our development, no matter how many meetings we have, we'll be simply working for the people who are giving us the money.
I totally agree with you.
And how you see this is how even the innovation is so much around problems that the funders are interested in.
Yes.
So I don't know. I don't have an answer, but I don't know what it will take.
But before you do, we have 5 minutes left, and I want you can touch on that in your closing remarks. So I'd just like us to give our closing remarks. Everyone, I know last week Ephraim took the closing remarks, so I'd like to start with you, Charles and Werner. I promised that you'd start with the closing remarks.
Well, I'm a bit pessimistic around this CFTA. I think it's going to be it's a big litmus test for us, and there is no shortcut to that apart from strengthening and proving the concept via our regional blocks. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's ownership. We need to have an honest conversation around ownership. It doesn't matter how many meetings we hold until we feel we own this, and it is about, yes, it doesn't matter, you know. So it would be good that if we see our entrepreneurs, our governments doing more to fund our initiatives.
Absolutely. Frame your closing remarks.
Again, I said at the beginning, you know, let me take a different angle. They're both very pessimistic. But I'm optimistic on the basis that if we aim, again, for the moon, we will settle amongst, again, I'll say this again, we can even settle amongst the bushes. We don't have to try the stars.
But we're moving
forward. You know, it's better than being stagnant. And I think this, especially it being a politically driven agenda, says a lot about the changing times on the continent.
Isam?
Yes, so what I wanted to say is, you know, we are all, you know, proud African. We love our continent. So for people that watch us that are non-African or that might think that our speech or discourse are a bit extreme, what I want to say is we're just, you know, a group of Africans who really wants the best for their continent. So nothing to be taken personally, one. And second, we also want to give credit to, you know, to foreign government or foreign investors who really think about Africa as a trading partner, as a partner. Like, for example, as you clearly mentioned, most of our funding comes from outside Africa. The number one funder is the Dutch government, and I would say the majority of our funds that we receive are coming from the Dutch taxpayer money. So we need to give credit when credit is due, and we are really grateful and appreciative of that. But what we're trying to do is just, you know, help get our continent to the next level. So that's, you know, that's our fight. Nothing personal.
Nothing personal. I like that caveat. Anyway, we have come to the end of our show. Thank you very much for joining us. We're here talking about the CFTA and its impact on boosting entrepreneurship in Rwanda. And some of the conversation has been very interesting. Pessimists on one hand and optimists on the other. But it's definitely a process that is going to take some time to implement and push this continent forward. Please stay tuned to our Twitter feed. Carry the conversation going on using #TheSquareRW. Thank you for joining us. See you here next week, next time, same time. Sorry. Have a good night.